quantitative easing. What is it, and does it matter?
Yeah, okay, great. Look, quantitative easing for everyone, 90-second spot is basically when the financial collapse happened in, back in 08, 09, that everyone said, holy hell, what are we going to do? There's so much debt in the system and everything was falling apart. And they said, you know what we should do? Let's flood the modern economies and the Western world with more money. Let's create more debt to dig our way out of the debt hole, effectively. There is some kind of theory about it, but it really has been untried, this almost modern monetary theory. And so really what it says, the reserve banks of certain countries around the world say, we are going to create extra zeros on the computer screen. Let's imagine that all the capital and money that America has, or Canada has, Australia has, is basically a number with big long zeros on a computer screen. And the reserve banks basically said, we're going to add a couple zeros, just like that, just out of magic. And the theory was, hey, we're creating it and borrowing it from future generations, and we'll sort it out in 30, 40 years' time. And then by that time, the world will have grown so much, we would have solved all the problems, and everyone will be okay. Okay, so it's basically extra zeros on a computer screen. So it's the volume of money in the system basically increases. So it's very different compared to the pricing or the cost that the Federal Reserve sells the money, or America lends money to China, or the bank ends up lending money to you. That's very different from the cost of money. It actually means there's more money. So you used to hear these things like, oh, there's money sloshing around the system. And so what did that mean? They created extra zeros on the computer screen, but that's not good enough. That doesn't do anything. It's just zeros on a computer screen in the Federal Reserve. Then they go to the banks, and the banks, like the big banks, Deutsche and Lehman, all those sort of guys, and say, hey, we've got extra zeros on a computer screen, and we're going to give you some extra zeros. And they go, cool, what do you want us to do with it? And they say, for God's sakes, lend it. Get it out there. Because if you don't, everyone's going to be unemployed and the world's going to collapse and we'll have all these ridiculous stuff going on. And they go, okay, no worries. But, hey, we're going to have to loosen our criteria a bit. And they go, well, you can loosen it a bit, just not, don't go doing stupid stuff like this. This is what we got in the first place. This is why we're here. So then they say, okay, no worries. We'll loosen it a little bit. But basically, because we've got so much, we have to discount the price. So when you've got, Terry, when you've got too much CBD oil and you've got to get rid of it, and the guy down the road's got a heap of CBD oil, you've got to drop your CBD oil price. Same sort of thing, right? So the banks had to drop their price, and then they all searched for people that they knew would not default on the loans, because they'd come out of this situation where defaults caused the whole problem. So you got this situation where people who are borrow worthy, like companies like Apple, countries, big banks, basically the banks said, look, we've got all this money to lend out. We're pretty much going to lend it out to you at almost zero, because we know you'll pay it back. You're pretty safe. And they go, well, what are we going to do with this? And so if it was a company, they'd basically share buybacks and give themselves big bonuses. All the directors walked out and they were amazing. When it was banks started just pushing out into people who already had assets to buy more assets, like again, the haves, like, you turn up and say, hey, I've got a dozen properties. And they go, well, would you like 13, 14 and 15? We know you're good for the money. You always pay your bills on time. And you go, I guess I'll just add to my portfolio, Whereas if someone turned up and said, I just want to get into the market. Well, hang on, we're not sure about you. You're a bit suspect. You don't have any capital behind you. So what happened with this quantitative easing, and my point for everyone out there is, you've got this slow inequality burn, and it's been going on for a decade, right? And this is where we are now. This slow burn, because the banks were forced to lend money out in the system. The theory was it would trickle down to keep the little guy employed, actually to keep the wheels spinning. It wasn't really for him to borrow and get into assets. There's the big guys got the assets. And because of that, because they did share buybacks, the share market went up. So everything went up. So for the last decade, quantitative easing, so the banks making the volume of money, adding zeros to the computer screen and forcing it, injecting it out into the system. It just made everything go up in price. So real estate assets, businesses, share prices. So they've all gone up. Why it matters is eventually inflation is now hitting pretty hard. So they were always trying to hit inflation, and somehow they thought they could have this like nice bit of inflation where it was like this desire to keep everything moving would in theory increase wages a bit and everyone would be happy, and that's what you want to have in society. Never really worked. And what's happened now is you've got inflation that's caused by nobody going to work. So instead of inflation being driven by, oh my God, I've got to have all these things, I want to buy all these things because I've got money sitting in the bank, everyone's going, I want a car, and you're telling me it's 6 months to get a car. Maybe I'll go down the road where they've got the one car I want, and I'll pay $5,000 more than what it's worth to beat out the other guy who wants that particular truck or something, right? So you get this inflation that's caused by bottlenecks in the supply chain, factories shut down. China's decided that they're not shipping out urea, which makes AdBlue, which is trucking stuff again. They've decided to stop sending us steel and timbers, or our steel and timber in the last 12 months for building went up 100%. There's huge increase in cost increases, and that was China, pushing back, showing us that they're stronger than us. But also they want to keep stuff for themselves. So this inflation in the US, especially, and this is, when we talk about the Fed, we talk about the US. Their inflation is running about 7 or 8%. We haven't seen that really since the 90s. So instead of the Federal Reserve saying we're going to raise interest rates and do it really quickly, what they're saying is, you know what, we were doing this extra zeros on a computer screen every month. We've been putting out billions. It's been going on for a decade. We're going to stop that for a start. The first thing we're going to do is stop that. We're going to stop doing extra zeros on the computer screen. We're going to say stop pushing money into the system, and at the same time, then we're probably going to start raising the pricing of the money. So that's also going to be increase as well. So there's a big shift. There's a big shift coming. It's scaring the pants out of the share market, because the share market was based upon extra zeros on computers, like this free money almost. Well, it was free. There's nothing almost about it. It was free. The share market's looking at it. Bitcoin's taken a massive dive because it was kind of propped up by people having this free money, all this stuff as well. Interestingly, gold's taken a dip, which I think will only be temporary. I think you'll see gold and hard assets fly right back up. I don't see real estate taking the same dive as the share market. Previously, you've seen those sort of things. I get my gut says that hard assets, things I can grab onto, might just be where everyone's psyche ends up when they realize paper assets are really they're just like zeros on a computer screen. If you can make up zeros on a computer screen, you can tell me that the Apple shares are worth $20,000 each, and then they can tell me with 100,000, like 10,000. Like, what are they worth? No one really knows, So these are the things, and when we talk about why does quantitative easing matter, it only matters now when you're stopping it. So basically, it's like the wheels are just slowing down, and everyone's going, all right, what's anything really worth when free money doesn't keep turning up? So Warren Buffett would say, okay, you only see who's naked when the tide goes out, and swimming naked when the tide goes. All those sort of things, those euphemisms, that's kind of the same thing, mate. That's why it matters. And so for me, being involved in finance at the moment, looking at, lots of extra lending going on. We're expecting rates to go up, even in Australia. Canada is as well. The US has flagged it, but they're also pulling back in on the volume of money that exists. So it will be harder for people who are borderline borrowing to get money. And so some of that borderline money that people are hard to get will be what I call mid-tier businesses, mum and pop businesses, 10, 20, 50 employees, 100 employees, the middle class. The middle class is probably going to have a big problem on middle class businesses with a big increase in rates and stuff. Don't worry about the big companies. The big companies always end up fine. Whether their share price is worth $100 or $10, no one's really going under. They just get bought out and consolidated. You might see a real struggle with small, medium enterprise in certain countries that can't hold on after all these lockdowns, and then they'll get a double whammy of extra pricing on their capital and all their existing debt facilities. And that's why quantitative easing matters. And that's why it's like I think everyone's just taking a breath going, okay, it might be the point for a couple of years, like then when this next issue, comes through, everyone like, okay, who's still standing? Who's still standing? Everyone come forward. Okay. How many did we lose on this bloody crash? Okay. That business is gone. That business is gone. That one got bought up. It's a bit of that.